Hey, Curtis, man, check this out.
Okay.
Afghanistan vet Dexter Grant is broke, reeling from PTSD and on the verge of divorce when he's approached by his old army buddies to help rescue their former interpreter, the man who once saved Dex's life. It means ripping off a vicious queenpin's drug proceeds. But not to worry, they have it all worked out.
Max, who wrote that?
His name is Jeremy D. Baker, and this is his debut novel.
It sounds amazing. Let's get him on the show.
May have already done that, actually. In fact, he's right there in the studio.
Well, let's go. Citywide Blackout starts right now.
Welcome to Citywide Blackout with your hosts, Max Bowen and Curtis Hughes. With years of experience in journalism, music, and entertainment business, they put their knowledge to work, bringing you the best in-depth, fun, and sometimes outrageously bizarre interviews with authors, musicians, and many other creators from around the world. With the right amount of gusto and a few F-bombs thrown in for emphasis, you're sure to have a good time. So put up your feet, grab a beverage, and let's go.
Okay, Jeremy. So first thing we want to ask about is, as someone who has served in the U.S. Army for 20 years in a number of different capacities, did your own experience kind of help to shape the story? And if so, how?
So my experience in the military definitely shaped the story. I'll say first up front, disclaimer, I was in the Army for 5 years and had every intent of making it a career, got hurt, had to get out, and then I ended up working national security issues for the U.S. government. The military career segued into my government employee career, but it absolutely shaped the story in a number of ways. So the first is, in the Army, my job was counterintelligence agent, just like the protagonist in the book, Dexter Grant, who's a counterintelligence agent. So all of the training that he had and experienced in the book was training that I had in my life. Some of the things he does, there's a scene early in the book where he's in a bar and he has his back to the room, but he's got a mirror in front of him, so he feels okay. And he's kind of checking everybody out in the mirror and kind of almost making stories up in his mind about things he's observed about them. All of those sorts of things, were things that we were trained on. There's another part of the book where he has to get into some place that's a little bit secure. And so he knows that with a clipboard and a hard hat, essentially, you can get into just about anywhere if you have a sense of confidence. Like, those are sorts of things that they teach you in Army counterintelligence agents school. They teach you how to interrogate people and how to interview people and how to recruit sources and do all kinds of what would otherwise be maybe semi-nefarious stuff, right? Use your powers for good, not evil. So a lot of his direct experience there translated into the book, and sort of a pivotal experience for Dexter was his deployment to Afghanistan, where things go terribly wrong. I had a deployment to Afghanistan where something very, very similar went pretty wrong for me, but not as bad as it went for Dexter. I kind of took something that happened to me and then said, okay, well, what if it hadn't been okay ultimately in the end at the last second, and take everything to its worst possible degree? That all of that was kind of from my life as well. And then as I moved out of the Army and into the government employment, I spent almost the rest of my career to this point has been working counterterrorism, counter narcotics, law enforcement, gun running, human smuggling, human trafficking. And so all of that, when you're talking about criminal enterprises and money laundering in support of a drug operation, and how drug operations conceal their illicit proceeds and things like that, are all pulled from things that I've learned over the course of my career. And I was really excited to kind of bring that sort of verisimilitude of lived experience and lived knowledge into this story.
Yeah. And before we continue, I want to just take a second and say to you, Jeremy, to everyone who has served in the armed forces or has served or is going to be serving, thank you. Thank you for your service. It's not forgotten.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Now, we talk about the experience and how it kind of informs a story. Did this help you kind of dodge any of the somewhat cliches or some of the recurring themes that you see in books that have a main character who has a military service?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one of the things that I was really keen to do was, look, I love David Morrell. I love Rambo First Blood, right? Like, it launched an entire genre. But I also think that sort of the elite special forces soldier who has to go up against bad guys has been done a lot. And a lot of people do that really well, right? Like, Jack Carr does that really well. Mitch Rapp does that really bad. Thor does that really well, right? But that was not my experience in the military, right? A counterintelligence guy, as much cool stuff as I learned and as many cool deployments as I had, we are not snake eaters, right? We don't, parachute behind enemy lines with nothing but a knife and, face paint and take out the enemy general. We use human powers of persuasion to gather intelligence, to find spies, to find terrorists. I had a lot of exposure to SF guys. When I was in Afghanistan, I was directly assigned to a special forces team as like a supporting element, and my partner there was a special forces guy. So I got to see a lot about how they operated. But it was important to me in The Guilty Sleep that the protagonist, yeah, he's got some skills and he's got some experience, from his time in the Army, from his tour in combat. He's been, in an exchange of gunfire. But this is not someone who has inherently been trained to be an extraordinarily dangerous person, right? For every special forces soldier in the U.S. Army, there's 1,000 regular grunts, support service staff, cooks, bakers, intel weenies like I was, drivers, gas pumpers, recon scouts, whatever. And so to me, it felt like maybe the stakes would be a little bit higher if our protagonist was a normal guy who had some training and had some skills, but he couldn't walk into a room like the Equalizer and just like take everybody out at the drop of a hat. He had to use more of his brain power in addition to, the occasional fisticuffs or, the occasional gunplay or what have you. And you see, right, he is a capable guy. We know he's got a temper in his past. The book opens with him, kind of getting into it with four guys in a bar and, acquits himself reasonably well, but he's got some moves, but he's not a stone cold, killer. So that was something, yeah, I consciously made that decision. And then, in a lot of books where you've got, heroes like this, they might be kind of a lone wolf. Jack Reacher is a perfect example, who is my absolute favorite modern literary crime hero. In fact, having Lee Child read this book and like it and blurb it was like a dream come true for me. But
That was amazing.
Right, I couldn't believe it. It was a shot in the dark, and it happened, and it made my entire year really. But I didn't want this guy to be a lone wolf, right? Like, family was important to him. It was part of his motivation, and it was really the key part of his motivation was trying to get his family back. So those were kind of some of the departures I purposely took. Was I didn't want this guy to be a Superman, and I wanted him to be a husband and a father and someone who was a flawed human being because in large part of his experience, but also his choices that came after that experience, where he finds himself in too deep. And a lot of it's his own fault, and he's got to get himself out of it.
I like that you don't make your character Superman, because there are some books where this guy's, he's been in the service for like a 35 years, and he knows like every style like martial art on the planet. And if you don't worry about the main character, it's hard to take the threats they face seriously. If oh yeah, they got this. No worries.
No, I agree. And so part of the joy to me sometimes of reading like a Lee Child novel is, Jack Reacher is just going to go in and mess stuff up, and he's going to throw guys out of windows, and he's going to make it. And that's really fun. That's really fun to read a lot of times. But I'm also really drawn to vulnerable protagonists. Some of the folks I've been reading recently, S.A. Cosby, who is, I think, probably the best modern crime writer working today, or Jordan Harper's another great example, have very real, very flawed protagonists who can make mistakes and get hurt and hurt others by accident that they don't mean to. And I find that really appealing as well.
Jeremy, you obviously bring a lot of your experience to the book, which is extremely evident. But we're curious to what sort of research was done, kind of like outside of your experience for the book. Was there anything like you had to go seek professional guidance or anything like that for this?
A couple of things. So much of it is directly from my experience, but yeah, did some additional research. Actually, my best friend in the world, this book wouldn't be what it is without him. He's a great guy. His name is Zoltan, and he went to college for engineering, and he's a computer scientist. And Zoltan is a problem solver. That's like his favorite thing to do in the world. Is sometimes we'll just give each other hypothetical scenarios, and we'll talk through how we would solve those. And so as I was writing this book, we were talking about the plot, and I said, and there's going to be a heist, and it's like, kind of a bank heist, but it's kind of a twist because the money isn't really the bank's, it's kind of ill-gotten gains, right? This is what I'm thinking about in terms of a heist. And he's like, if I was doing it, like maybe I would do it this way. And he's a really smart guy, and he's got this great analytic mind. And so he and I basically brainstormed. We planned a bank heist together, right? So this will be someday evidence in a trial. I hope not for me or him if a bank is taken down in our neighborhood. But it was really useful to like have that conversation. Other things I researched was Eritrean food because there's an Eritrean family in the story. Where I live in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., we have this really diverse diaspora of folks from Central America and also East Africa, among others. And so I have had Ethiopian food, but I never had Eritrean food, which is similar but different, right? So you try that and you get a sense of what that is and the different stews and things. And then the book is set in a town in Maryland that is unnamed, that's based on a real town about 20 miles from where I live. And so spent some time, driving to and through and around and getting a real sense of what that town felt like. And it was like, it's a mid-sized town, but like the book, it's kind of fallen on some hard times. So there are like a couple nice little parts of town, and a lot of it's kind of run down because the industry has moved on. So spent some time there just getting a real sort of sense of the place. And then port operations in Baltimore. Actually, I think in terms of, because that's another key element of the book, in terms of fiction, one of the best things that's ever been done about the Port of Baltimore is Season of the Wire. If you've seen that, takes place substantially in and around the port. And that got a lot of stuff actually right, but redid some research on port operations and how things work there. But I got to say, like most of the rest of the book and the way things kind of work in the book was pulled from my own experience.
And I can imagine that like your Google history is just this like wide range of stuff.
Yeah, no search warrants, please. How to properly how to properly dispose of a body, right? People always talk about putting lye. Well, in certain climates like Maryland's, lye acts as a preservative, and you don't want to do that. You want to use mulched pine needles instead if you're going to bury a body in the woods.
Taking notes?
Yeah, I see you right.
Taking notes.
What's happening?
Oh boy.
Of course, The Guilty Sleep is your first book, Jeremy. And so I'm really interested in knowing, what was the writing process like? Like in the beginning, did you have it all mapped out and ready to go? And then going through it, you had to immediately change course and direction, or how did that go for you? What was it like?
Yeah, what's my style? I think there's a couple of great things to unpack there. So like there are really kind of two schools of thought when it comes to writing a novel. People tend to either be plotters, where they have everything kind of lined out where they want it to go, and they'll even do an outline. Chapter 1, this is going to happen, and they go and write it, right? And then there are pantsers, who they write by the seat of their pants, and they have a general idea, and they might even know where they want the story to end up, and then they throw some characters on a page, and the characters start doing stuff.
I was just going to say, they're just like throwing up on the page.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so the characters like take over the story, and they bring the writer along for the ride. I'm somewhere in the middle, which I don't know anyone else who really does this. I call myself a plantser, where I know where I want the story to go, and I have it generally planned out, and I even have a rough outline and a synopsis of what's going to happen. But then I start writing these characters, and doggone it, a lot of them, the best ones, take on a life of their own, and they start doing stuff that I didn't plan for. And I'm like, you chucklehead, why'd you do that? Oh, right, because that makes the most sense for who you are as a character. And I just hadn't seen it yet. And so then usually it's like I'll get about halfway through and I'll be like, oh, crap. And I need to then go back and re-outline what I've already written, give up on what I thought I was doing from the midpoint to the end. And then I outline as I go. For some reason that helps. I don't know why. 0 out of 10 would not recommend this methodology because I frustrate myself all the time, but somehow it works. It worked for this novel.
I definitely think that when it comes to writing, we've all got our styles, and and you're right. Usually, you're either a pantser, it's just like the Wild West, or you're a planner, and it's like note cards and Post-its. And I like that you kind of fall in the middle. It's like there's some planning, otherwise we'll see what happens.
He's the plantser. We're going to have to put that on the next book.
We've got to like copyright that thing. We got to copyright that thing at some point. But let us talk character creation, because your main character, Dexter, how did you form him, and did he undergo any major revisions during the writing process?
Yeah, no, very much so. And this was actually one of those books. I've been writing for like 23 years or so, but this book, the plot came to me almost completely formed in the beginning, and then I ended up like in my, as I said, as a planter, threw about half of it out the window and went back to it. But Dexter as a character actually was like 95% formed, and I was writing it, except I was writing it with the main character of Destiny Harper, a female Army counterintelligence veteran. The plot and everything else was going to be much the same. And then I realized about a chapter and a half in that I just wasn't getting the voice and the feel right. She just wasn't speaking yet, kind of how I thought she might have been speaking to me at that point in the story. And I couldn't figure out why. And I took a step back and actually put the book down for a few days and just thought through, and finally I just sat down and I started typing the next sentence, and the S and the X are right next to each other on the keyboard, right? Like the X is right below the S. I started typing Des because that was her nickname, and I typed Dex instead, and just that mistype. Ooh, look, I got so excited I knocked my headphones off. I got so excited I knocked my headphones off. But that mistype, like a light went off, and I was like, oh, she's not Destiny. He's Dex. He's a father, and all of a sudden it clicked because I'm a father of a girl, and he's a father of a girl, and I'm like, yeah, okay. Now I've got his voice. I can put more of me into him, and he's feeling more real, right? So that was the personality, the type of trauma, the experience, all of that is the same, but there was a gender switch.
It's always those like random moments that can make the story. That like thing you see on a billboard as you're like driving to work, or the thing that like someone says just at random, and you're like, wait, what's that? We have a story.
Yeah. Yeah. That little nugget that comes out of nowhere.
Exactly. In your case, it's just that little like, mistype that all of a sudden, oh, now we've got our main character.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe Destiny is out there somewhere? Do you think there's a possibility of her kind of being in the story at some point, or maybe a future book?
I think there's a possibility. Actually, one of the I've got 2 or 3 irons in the fire right now, and one of them is a female protagonist who it's not Destiny, but there's a lot of similarity in terms of some trauma that she's experienced, some betrayal that she's experienced, that character is definitely informed by my initial vision for Destiny. Yeah.
All right. Now, earlier we talked about the need to keep a character vulnerable and how that can help to kind of drive like the plot forward. How do you keep Dexter vulnerable, both I think in terms of his abilities, but also as a person?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, this speaks to a sort of a larger issue at the root of the book and in my own personal journey to writing the book. And that is, I think, one of the key things that makes Dexter so vulnerable, both in terms of the fact that he wants so badly to do the right thing, but can't seem to find it sometimes, or keeps making choices that he knows are bad for him. He wants so badly to do the right thing, and just can't seem to, because he's experienced profound damage. He's got PTSD from his combat experience in Afghanistan. There's a particular incident that happens in an Afghan military compound when he goes on a mission that leads to severe PTSD for him, and that contributes to the pending collapse of his marriage, and he's drinking too much, and it also makes him vulnerable to being recruited by his old partners to help them save the life of their interpreter, who's still in Afghanistan, where they're gonna carry out this heist. And I think if Dexter had been in a better place personally, and if he had been in a better place with his family, and he was still with his wife and kid and not trying desperately to get them back, he probably just tells his old buddies, thanks, but no thanks, right? So he's vulnerable to that. A lot of that comes from my own personal experience. I came back from Afghanistan with PTSD. the operations tempo that we had when I was in Afghanistan, as we were supporting the special forces team, and a number of incidents that happened while I was there, including, as I kind of alluded to, I had an incident at an Afghan military compound that was roughly parallel to something Dex goes through in the book. I found myself waking up in the night in an absolute covered in sweat, tied up in the blankets, seeing gunmen in the shadows, right? Reaching for my own gun, which wasn't there. And this was when I came back, right? My experience in the Army was 2002 when I was in Afghanistan. Dexter's was more recent. So I'm at the very early onset of the war on terror, and not a whole lot of attention was being paid to in the military to PTSD yet at that time. And I remember talking to, I was having a post-deployment physical, and I told the doctor what was going on, and she was like, "Oh yeah, sounds like you're having trouble sleeping. Maybe you should think about talking to someone about that," and just kind of left it there. And I think nowadays they're much better. They'll do a referral and things like that. But I was kind of lost. And for me, what ended up really helping me was writing. So I've always loved like telling stories. I've always loved reading. I especially love genre fiction, horror, science fiction, speculative fiction in some way, right? And I was reading one of those like light speeds years best science fiction or something. It was something probably edited by like John Joseph Adams, right? It was like really good. And I was reading a short story. It might have been a Stephen King short, like The Jaunt or something like that. And I was like, I wonder if I could write like a cool short story. And so like I just started writing. And, of course they were, the first ones especially were all crap. But what I discovered was I could take a character and put them on the page and put them through some trauma, or have them been someone who had been through some trauma. And I could put my own trauma kind of like into that character. I could put my own PTSD into that character and look at their thoughts and feelings and the way they were reacting to a situation. But I was back here behind the keyboard, safely removed, and they were in the mess, right? And so doing that enough times, it really allowed me to sort of explore what I had gone through and the impact it had on me. And the more I wrote, the better I slept. And so I just didn't stop writing. Like I said, I've been writing for like 23 years, mostly short stories. This was my first sort of foray into non-speculative fiction, just straight crime thriller. Although there's some very small speculative elements in there, or near future elements in there. So Dex's vulnerability, back to your original actual question, is in a way my own vulnerability from my experience in Afghanistan. And so I think that I hope it comes through in the book. And then for me, right, being just like Dex, I'm no Rambo, a 46-year-old out of shape former, military guy who's only been in a couple of fights in his entire life, right? Like, I'm certainly not going to, parachute behind enemy lines and take out some general with just a knife and face paint. So writing myself in some way, I think in this is where a lot of that vulnerability comes from.
Jeremy, you mentioned earlier that you've been writing for 23 years, and it got me thinking. Most writers that we talk to who have been writing for that long, maybe have had a few books out or whatever, have always said that there's always one to a half dozen, whatever, that have been tabled, that will never see the light of day. Absolute crap. I'm sure that you've got a couple in your nightstand that are just there as token reminders, as this was my humble beginnings and I'm never going to get them published. That being said, though, how long did you work on The Guilty Sleep before you felt it was ready for it to be released?
No, that's a great question. And you're totally right. I've got, a couple of little collections of short stories that like I had bound just for friends and family, right? And I definitely have a novel that is not out, although I have hopes. I think someday, if I take another run at it, it could be pub ready. And it's in a different genre. It's like near future military science fiction, and I think it kicks ass. I worked on The Guilty Sleep. Gosh, it's going to be published next month, May of 2025. I started writing it in October of 2021. And where I was at was I had just finished and trunked the last novel, as you said, in the nightstand, may never see the light of day. And I wanted to try something new. And I mentioned earlier S.A. Cosby, who I think is the king of current crime noir fiction. I had just read a book of his that I recommend to everybody if they like crime thrillers, called Razorblade Tears. It may have been Blacktop Wasteland, one of those two, both excellent. And then at the same time, right, August of 2021, Afghanistan fell to the Taliban because the US pulled out, right? And it fell like that. And we had been there for almost 20 years, right? Almost 2 decades of war. And as somebody who had been there and had friends there and knew people who didn't come back and knew people who did come back but not whole, or who came back and then lost their battle with PTSD, you kind of wonder what it was all for. And I was feeling a lot of things, and I was talking to a lot of my former battle buddies from the Army, and a lot of thoughts and feelings. And I found myself in this place where I both wanted to write in a new genre, and I was really feeling motivated and inspired by how awesome Sean Cosby's book was that I had read. And then I had all these thoughts and feelings about Afghanistan. And because of the act of writing for a couple decades as a mechanism almost for self-therapy, it made all the sense in the world to write a story that centered the struggles of a vet and took place during the fall of Afghanistan, happening in the background, and explored themes like the cost of war on those who fight the nation's wars, the pull of camaraderie when you're with a small group of guys like I was in Afghanistan. My counterintelligence team that I was on, there was 5 of us just in it together, right, 24/7. That pull of camaraderie where, you're going to ride or die with those guys if they give you a good reason. And the emotions that I feel as we're pulling out, and you see the desperation on the faces of the people as we leave, and you hear the stories about, and I know people here in the States who worked very hard to get some of their allies out of Afghanistan. All of that kind of came together as a way to kind of get through a lot of those thoughts and feelings. In fact, there's a scene in the book where Dexter goes to like a veterans support group, and there are veterans there from like Vietnam and Panama and Desert Storm 1 and the War on Terror. And they're talking about the fall of Afghanistan. And there's 5 or 6 different voices in the room talking about, well, it should have gone this way, or why didn't we do this? Or I think, the generals are to blame, or I blame the politicians, or what was it all even for? And it's not verbatim, but like every position that was given voice in that meeting by one of the veterans was something that I had heard or thought myself from one of my fellow veterans. Or in one case, I've got a dear friend, Marcus Saki, who's a fantastic novelist in his own right. He and I corresponded about that a lot, and he's a very deep thinker, a very philosophical guy, and we exchanged a lot of thoughts about that. So, like, all of that kind of came in that one scene, but then kind of suffuses the whole book in terms of sort of that backdrop of the fall of Afghanistan and the cost of war, and then like, how do you do the right thing by a guy that got left behind? This interpreter that saved their lives when things went bad in this compound event that happened, and we've got to get him out. And how far are we willing to go to bring him home? But is everything as it seems, right? There's a lot of uncertainty along with that as well.
Hi, this is singer Kate Eppers, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
Jeremy, you have been name dropping quite a bit throughout this interview. A lot of really amazing writers out there. And I like that. I appreciate that. You know the field. That's awesome. Do you have any favorites? You obviously like read like crazy here. Anyone that's like, this is always on my nightstand?
Yeah, great question. Because I love reading. I love authors. I don't have a ton of friends like who are authors that I'm like super close with. Marcus is the exception. I've known him like, before I even really was writing, I think, super seriously. But yeah, so I already said Sean Cosby, Jordan Harper, like 2 of the best working today. Always love Lee Child. Eli Craner is great. Writes a lot of like Midwest and Southern noir. to me, I think one of my all-time favorites who doesn't get a lot of play is a guy named James Crumley, who wrote just a couple of books. The Mexican Tree Duck is one of them. The Last Good Kiss is another. And these are like beautifully written, vintage, sort of literary noir, private eye novels. Just fantastic. Like John D. McDonald meets Cormac McCarthy. Like just awesome stuff. And then I will always read Joe R. Lansdale. Like whatever he puts out, like any of the Hap and Leonard books, of course, but he writes all kinds of stuff, and it's always interesting and well plotted with great characters, but it's also really fun. And that's what I love about Joe Lansdale, and why I'll always read him is you can tell he's having a great time when he's writing the books, and like you're going to have a good time reading it because like the dialogue is snappy, like the plots are interesting, like funny stuff happens. I will always put a Joe R. Lansdale at the top of my TBR pile every single day.
I love this. I love like just like the enthusiasm you have for all these writers. It's so cool. Let's do a hypothetical. Let's do a hypothetical for a second here. If you could collaborate with someone, who do you think would be a good fit for you, and like what you like to write about in your style?
Oh man, that is a great question. I love that question so much. This is me stalling for time,
right?
Trying to think through who would be a great collaborator. Because there's so many people I'd love to collaborate with, and I'm trying to think like who would I not be annoying to? Because like I would be like really enthusiastic and be like, hey, what about this? What about this? What if we did this? And they'd be like, dude, could like you maybe calm down for 4 seconds?
It's like decaf. Try some.
Yeah, what would be a dream collab would be actually, so this doesn't really count. So this is kind of a cop out. James Crumley doesn't write anymore. I would love to take the character of his PI, C.W. Shugru, and carry on his adventures in that type of collaboration. But if I was going to collaborate with, current writer who's writing currently, who I absolutely love, and I'm gonna do it like this. Whenever you're working with someone who's like light years better than you, it always makes you better, right? Like when I was in the Army, trust me, I'm going somewhere with this, in counterintelligence school, which is like 6 months along, and it's in Fort Huachuca, Arizona, like 20 miles from the Mexico border in the mountains. It's beautiful. And you get a little more freedom than like basic training, right? Like you're in school, you're learning. There was a guy there named Tony Lee Thomas, who is a brilliant musician. And he did some time in the Army, and now he's a musician actually in New England. So if you guys follow on Facebook, check him out where he plays. He's brilliant. He is a phenomenal guitar player and singer, brilliant songwriter. And I dabbled, right? I played a little acoustic guitar. And so Tony like saw me playing one day, and he's like, hey, we should play. And he started playing. He was like so much better than me. I was like, I can't even. And he's like, no, come on, play. It'll be awesome. I started playing with him over the course of a couple months. Like my skill improved so much. It was uncanny, right? So who I would pick like that I would write with is, I'm going to leave the crime thriller genre entirely because I love genre fiction. I'm going to go with Stephen Graham Jones, who I think is one of the best modern horror authors working today. He's written a million books. I Was a Teenage Slasher, Mongrels, The Only Good Indians. His most recent is The Buffalo Hunter. He writes horror for the modern generation, and he's got incredible literary flair, but the stories are real and grounded, and they speak a lot to what it's like to grow up kind of in the cracks of America, right? There's a lot of exploration of class and race and struggle in his books. And the way he tells a story is magnificent. And if I could sit down next to Stephen Graham Jones and even just write like a 5,000 word short story together, I would consider that like a perfect cap to a career, man. Like that guy is writing at another level. Like him, or if I was going to go to a different genre, to sci-fi, N.K. Jemisin, who wrote the Broken Earth trilogy, which is being made into, I think, a series now, which you want to talk about, you sit down to read something and it's unlike anything you've ever read before. And I've been reading sci-fi all of my life, right? Like that was my first love was like Andre Norton and Douglas Hill and young adult sci-fi when I was like 13, living in Wheaton, Maryland, riding my bicycle to the library, man. N.K. Jemisin just completely subverts every trope, but also writes so beautifully and explores such deep issues that, like, I don't even know if I could collaborate with her, but like I would love to sit next to her and watch her work and talk to her about her process and like hope some of the genius like rubs off on me. And yeah, those would be two dream collabs. I couldn't limit it to just one. I'm sorry. I think I gave you three instead. I
love
apologize.
that. Well, if these writers happen to be listening to this episode, this is the man to reach out to. Do the collabs. He's going to be awesome to work with.
Steve and Nora, call me.
Exactly.
Here.
Exactly. Always ask the question. That's what I always tell people. Always ask the question. Worst they'll say is no, and you can say, hey, at least I asked.
That's right.
You never have
Very
to
good.
wonder what if. But let's talk about a what if here, Jeremy. And hopefully this isn't too spoilery, but does Dexter have more adventures ahead of him?
I think he does. I talked about some projects I have in the works, and one of those is a semi-sequel to The Guilty Sleep. If you've read The Guilty Sleep, you know that there is one of the figures in the criminal underworld is this guy named Melchizedek Turner, and he is kind of a bag man for the money laundering operation. And he's this big kind of like rednecky, but also kind of a surfer dude. And he had been in prison in California for a number of years, and he was part of the prisoner firefighting program. He's got like gnarly tats, but like lots of burn scars because something happened to him when he was a prison firefighter. And he's got this kind of uncanny sense of like when things are breaking bad, right? He can feel the fire like shift behind him, right? He's that kind of guy. There's a lot of depth to him, and he's one of those characters that you start writing and then they just like kind of take over their own story. And he was going to be your kind of standard run-of-the-mill henchman for me, but then his role in the story, without giving any spoilers, takes on a lot of significance, especially sort of in the latter third of the story. And I realized that there's more to tell in his tale. And so in the next book, we start from his perspective, and he's trying to do the next right thing in his life, right? So a key thing that we explore in The Guilty Sleep is Dex trying to find this next right thing. It's even capitalized, right? Like it's something he learned from his fathers. When in doubt, do the next right thing. And now in the next book, Melchizedek Turner is trying to do that next right thing for him, and he gets in trouble, and he realizes that he is not equipped for the situation that he's in. Now, he's a big, tough guy. He'll walk into a bowling alley full of neo-Nazi bikers and tear the place up, right? In fact, I think he's probably going to do that. But he comes into a situation where he needs a little nuance, and he needs a little intelligence expertise, and he might need some help interrogating people and talking to people. And who can he turn to? Well, he knows this guy, Dexter Grant, who can help him do what he needs to do. I don't want to get into too much because I think it'll give spoilers for The Guilty Sleep, but I do think we've got more to hear from Dex and from Zed Turner together.
I love that. All right. Now, I want to talk horror now because you brought up that you want to like work in horror, and I'm a huge, huge horror fan. Love a good horror book. What specifically in horror would you want to do? Would you want to do a haunted house? Would you want to do a demon story, zombies, a slasher story?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love it all, but I also feel like because I read a good amount of horror. I don't read a ton of it, although I love it. And I've written a few sort of like horror-y type short stories, but it's one of those like I really don't feel qualified because there's so many amazing people working in that space, right? I mentioned Stephen Graham Jones, but you talk about like Paul Tremblay, and I'm reading T. Kingfisher's A House of Very Good Bones right now, which is brilliant and funny and amazing. But you know what I like is I like sort of like, if you know Laird Barron, who the Isaiah Coleridge stories, where there's almost like a noir element, and maybe there's like some eldritch horror thing happening. You know, that sort of thing appeals to me in a way. A haunted house, I don't know that I could pull that off, but I think I could pull off like a detective on the hunt for a serial killer encounters something way more dark and twisted than even like the worst serial killer imaginable, or something along those lines, right? Like might be pretty dope if it hasn't been done to death already. but I do love the horror space. It's what I love about the genre is it's so broad. Like you listed just like a few of the different sort of subgenres. My daughter, I was talking with Curtis for a second about our kids. My daughter's a huge horror fan. So we went to our first horror convention last year. We went to MonsterCon in Philadelphia because the cast of Terrifier was there,
Nice.
and she got to meet like Art the Clown and Damien Leone, and it was a great time. So I do enjoy like a good like slasher flick, and a good slasher story for sure. I do think I'm drawn to stories where vampires and werewolves, like the classics, but they can be done really well. Like an early novella I wrote that will probably never see the light of day was Depression era bank robbers on the run from a job gone south that stumbles into a small town that is almost entirely populated with vampires. It's crazy. I don't know what I was drinking or smoking when I wrote the thing because somehow like the lost Russian princess Anastasia shows up, but she's a vampire hunter, and like they all get into trouble together and try to take out the vampires. And like I don't think it was a very good story probably, but I had a lot of fun with it, and the idea was fun. So I do like that kind of idea if you're gonna like dive into the horror genre of like mixing crime and criminality and things like that I'm pretty knowledgeable with, or mixing military or like intelligence work with horror. I'm a huge fan of Alma Katsu, who was a former CIA and NSA intelligence analyst who writes spy novels but also writes horror fiction and moves like seamlessly between both genres. And I'd almost love to blend those, sometime.
I want to read this story about Anastasia the vampire hunter. That sounds like a
kind of wanna
great
read it.
story. Holy
You need
shit.
to pull it out.
I might need to detrunk it, fellas, and see where it goes.
I mean, like a vampire community. Dude, there's so much depth to be found there. It actually reminded me a bit of the Pine Deep trilogy by Jonathan Mayberry, who we talked about prior to the recording. That's a great horror story, and let us see what we can do to make this vampire hunter story happen, because I think we got something here.
All right, might need to dig that novella out and see what happens.
I love it.
Authors often talk about their writing process and how it's, helped them through personal issues. And we definitely spoke about that earlier with The Guilty Sleep in your case. In writing the book, did you ever have any cause at all to either stop, maybe want to change some subject matter, or maybe walk away from a topic altogether?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of scenes that were really hard to write. The scene of the veteran support group, I think I tend to be a pretty fast writer. Like if I sit down and get going, I'll bake out like 4,000 words in a session over a couple of hours. That scene, which is about 3,000 words, I think it's one full chapter. I think it took me a week, maybe 10 days to write that, because I kept, kind of getting into it and then going, I need to take a step back, just kind of catch my breath. And it was because I'm writing it in the immediate aftermath of the pullout from Afghanistan, and all of those feelings were still very fresh and very raw. And hearing about, folks who were trying to get to the States from there that had helped us and had been left behind, things like that. That was a hard scene to write. There's another scene in the book where Dexter, who is, as you know, estranged from his wife and his daughter, his young daughter, and he's trying desperately to figure out how to get himself right so he can try to win them back. And they all still love each other, but he's just too damaged. It's not safe to be around him. There's a scene where they have a moment together at a park, and Dex is talking to his wife, trying to convince her to give him another chance. That was a really hard scene to write as well. Fortunately, my wife and I have not been estranged, and I haven't, my level of PTSD didn't lead to the self-destructive behaviors that Dex's did. But putting myself in his position and feeling that vulnerability as he faced losing his wife and daughter, and his wife in the book, Daria, personality-wise, is very much my wife, very strong, capable, independent woman who's like, my job is to keep my kids safe and like be complete as a person, right? And be like a pillar and a fortress for my kid. That's my wife. And then his kid, my daughter's 15 now. His daughter is, 4 or 5. I just think back to my daughter at that age. And so imagining that and them was really tough to write. And then the flashback scene back to his time in Afghanistan, which is broken up in interludes throughout the book, telling the overarching story of what happened in Afghanistan, because that was in such large part based on something that happened to me there. I was revisiting that for the first time in like 20 years. And that was, those three were like the toughest ones to write for me.
We talked about this earlier in the episode, and we have to address the elephant in the room. Lee Child giving you a shout out for this book. And I'm going to read it, okay, so everyone can hear this. A terrific debut, fast, tough, and hard, shot through with hard-won authenticity and deep humanity. Don't miss out. Jeremy, dude.
Seriously.
Dude, right? That was my exact reaction.
Dude.
What's it like to get that kind of praise from one of the best if not the best in the business?
Yeah, I think out of everything that's happened, look, anything after finishing a novel is gravy, right? Whether you indie publish yourself on like Amazon, whether you get a literary agent, like whether the agent is able to sell the book to a big five or a big indie, if it gets optioned, if they make a movie, if they make a TV series, whatever, it's all gravy. You wrote a book, right? Like, so that just felt great to like finish a novel and feel good about it. And there was a lot of revision, right? I think I mentioned I finished, started writing in October 2021. We're going to publication in May of 2025. There was a lot of work that went into it in between. And blurbs are always kind of a shot in the dark anyways, especially if you're not, in the literary fiction community where you've got an MFA program that you went to and you've got like professors and fellow students, or if you've been to like a writing workshop, like if you've been to Clarion West or something like that, like you probably have like a community you can plug into. I mentioned, like I've got a friend who's a good novelist, a great novelist who's a good friend. And so like that was an easy blurb to ask for. He's a good friend, but like all the other blurbs that I went out for were people I didn't know and that were complete shots in the dark. And a couple of them were ones that I went after myself, because that's how blurbing works, is like your agent might know some, your editor might know some, and you might know some. So I shot a couple of notes to people whose work I like and respect that I thought might be a good fit for the subject matter. There's a sci-fi author who's a fellow vet named Zach Topping, who's written some near future military sci-fi that just kicks so much ass. And he's like a good dude. So I just like literally messaged him on Twitter, hey, love your books. I've got a book coming out. Would you? And he's like, yeah, send it to me. And he like gave me a really nice blurb, like just didn't know me from anyone. Super nice. Elliot Ackerman is a New York Times bestselling author, award-winning author who's written about Afghanistan and who's written also science fiction and it's just great dude. There's another one, emailed out of the blue, never met, never even talked to the guy. And he's like, he's a fellow vet. He's like, I'll take a look, right? And then a couple of other ones were my agent knows PJ Tracy's agent because they're at the same agency, right? So great blurb from there. And then my editor was like, I'll go after Steve Hamilton, which was a great blurb. Like, he compared this book to The Sympathizer, which I thought was like extremely high praise and very kind. And they had said, like, who is your list of like dream blurbers? Anyone's dream list is going to have a lot of folks on there who are super busy, and a blurb from them can really sometimes draw a lot of great attention. And I threw Lee Child on there as like ha ha ha, dream blurber. Anyone writing a crime thriller would want Lee Child to blurb their book, of course. Like, if I don't put him on the list, you guys should drop me as an author, because it's like crime thriller author malfeasance, right? And my editor, Toni Kirkpatrick at Diversion Books, who is amazing, she made this book so much better than it was before, by the way. She's like, okay, well, I forget what the exact connection is, and I don't want to blow up the spot, but there was some connection to Lee or Lee's camp. And she's like, I'll try. We'll see what happens. And it was literally only a couple months later. I don't know if we hit him in just the right window. And I had gotten home from work, and it had been like a long week at work in the national security space. And I fire up the Gmail, and the subject line of the email is just like, oh my G. from my editor. I'm like, oh no, what has happened? Has there been a supply chain issue? Right? Are they folding? Are they going out of business? Or did they get bought? Or what issues? And then she's like, see this blurb from Lee Child. And oh, by the way, here's a lovely note he wrote along with it that basically said, tell Jeremy, congrats, you're an author now. Welcome to the dark side. Like, how thoughtful is that? Along with this blurb. So it was a huge, huge moment on Cloud Nine. Every blurb is a gift. Every author who takes the time to read your book and actually likes it and says something nice about it is amazing. It was just that was one we didn't expect to get, given how popular Lee is, how busy he is, how many of these requests he gets. So yeah, that was, I'm still pinching myself over that one.
And of course, it has to go on the book cover, which is what you did, which is amazing. I mean, like that sells it right there. To have Lee Child praise it, it's like, I'm going to read this thing.
It feels good. It does. You feel like you've gotten the nod right from the master, and you're like, okay, look, I think every author who's not like an already internationally famous bestseller or like a sociopath is probably filled with crippling self-doubt all the time. That's like the writer's stock and trade, is your laptop and crippling self-doubt. And so like for a brief shining moment, something like that makes you go, oh, at least with this thing, right? This doesn't suck. I have something here. Look, publishing is a crapshoot, right? Like we all know this. If there was a formula, everyone would have it figured out all the time, but there isn't. And you never know what's going to hit and what's going to miss. But something like that makes you feel like, okay, yeah, we've got some momentum here. Maybe let's see where it goes.
You mentioned that Lee welcomed you to the writing world. He says, welcome to the dark side. Do you feel like a real author now? Do you feel like, hey, I've arrived. I'm Jeremy Baker, writer?
No, absolutely not. No, I'm still very much, maybe it's because I'm not a sociopath. I'm still like, I'm full of crippling self-doubt still, right? I did get the box of the author copy hardbacks. So opening that and like holding the book in my hand made it feel real and made me feel like, yes, this is not just a fever dream. And okay, maybe I do feel a little bit like, yeah, I'm an author and I can go on like Barnes and Noble and pre-order this if I want. And like, I'm going to do a signing here and a conversation there and a podcast here, right? Like, yeah, stuff is happening. So I don't know that I really feel like an author yet. I feel like a guy who wrote a book and is having like kind of a fun adventure. Enjoy that adventure as long as it lasts, I guess.
Well, folks, with that, we are going to be bringing this thing to a close. But Jeremy, the question we ask every writer, every artist that we have on the show, what's next?
What's next? I have got several projects in the works. I talked a little bit about one where I've got a female protagonist, and she is somebody who is a little bit more Rambo-esque, but still incredibly vulnerable, who is someone who woke up as an adult with no memory of her childhood and has been through some things and is capable of shocking acts of violence and is trying to figure out where she came from and what she's got going on. We have got a second project that is very much a continuation of the journey of Dexter Grant and Zed Turner from The Guilty Sleep. And then I do have a genre thing in the works, which is half SEAL Team 6 and half Raiders of the Lost Ark and half Alien and half other stuff. That's 4 halves, but it's basically a special forces team in Syria discovers a hidden entrance to an underground sort of temple complex after an earthquake. And they're on the run from ISIS, and they get into all kinds of trouble with something or some things that is lurking in sort of the underground temple. And I guess we got to add a fourth after we've talked, is I've got to dust off my bank robbers meet vampires meet Anastasia, the Lost Russian Princess Vampire Hunter novella and see what we can do with that.
Yes, definitely. Well, folks, this is it. We're bringing it all to a close. Jeremy Baker, this has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And folks, if you're wondering, okay, where do I get the book? Well, it's not out quite yet, but you can pre-order this guy. You go to jeremydbaker.com. All the links are there. The Guilty Sleep drops on May 6th. The audiobook version drops on May 26th. So if you are like me and you consume Audible, get the audiobook version. It's going to be, I'm sure it's going to be absolutely amazing. And Jeremy, man, thank you so much for joining us. I've loved this and looking forward to the next conversation.
Thanks so much. It was great to be with you guys.
Thank you to the listeners, as always, for checking this thing out. We love you guys. I'm your host, Max Bowen.
And I'm Curtis Hughes.
And we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
And with that, we bring this episode to a close. Thanks for listening. And if you haven't already, check us out on Facebook under Citywide Blackout, and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. You can catch this and all your favorite episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And new episodes are added every week, as well as on Boston Free Radio every Saturday at 10 p.m. You get at me at citywidemax@yahoo.com if you want us to just a guest, submit your music, or just drop us a line. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.